Today I'd like to examine the 2006 Paul McGugan film, Lucky Number Slevin. This film has a very strong cast, maybe not as star-studded as its fellow 2006 film, the Scorsese Best Picture winner The Departed, but a really good ensemble nonetheless. Academy Award winners Sir Ben Kingsley and Morgan Freeman, as well as Academy Award nominee Stanley Tucci, join Bruce Willis, Josh Hartnett, and Lucy Liu in this highly entertaining crime drama. Now, this film did not receive favorable reviews from critics. It currently holds a 51% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. However, it has an audience score of 87%, and this is one time that I would definitely side with the audience over the critics. The critical consensus states, trying too hard to be clever in a Pulp Fiction kind of way, this film succumbs to a convoluted plot, overly stylized characters, and dizzying set design. Ironically, this consensus contains all the elements that I feel make this a good film, not a poor one. Now, there is a link to Pulp Fiction in this film, which I'll get to in a few minutes. But first, let's examine the plot. In my opinion, the plot is not so much convoluted, but merely quite complex.
Well, there's a lot of people. People connected only by the slightest of events.
Like Mr. Goodcat says, it does involve a lot of people. Now, I'm not going to break it down for you because I'm assuming if you're watching this that you've seen the film. But the bottom line is that Mr. Goodcat and Slevin, or Henry, carry out some serious revenge, killing everyone responsible for the death of Henry's family 20-some-odd years earlier. I think the reason a lot of critics felt the plot was convoluted was because the story is not told in a linear fashion. The first few scenes are shown in order, but with some information withheld from the audience. But as the movie progresses, the flashbacks become more and more frequent until the end when we are jumping all over the place. Ordinarily, I would say that this would be cause for confusion. However, the complexity of the narrative and the non-linear timeline are offset with stripped-down, simplified dialogue.
Should I?
I don't know. Should you?
I don't know. Should I?
Sent from an is to a was before he'd had his breakfast. I need you to make it look like it ain't what it is.
Because that is right at the top of my list of things that friends do not do to their friends.
We're not being bombarded with grandiloquent language. By giving the characters short, basic words to use, the audience is then able to use the majority of their cognitive ability to follow the twists and turns of the plot. Secondly, I think the label of overly stylized characters is bang on, but that's not a bad thing in this movie. The characters occasionally poke fun at the situation they are in as if they're aware they're in a movie.
Well, I don't suppose I have to say anything as trite and cliched as go to the police and you're a dead man.
I think this is the part where you tell me not to walk too far.
Lindsay and Slevin spend more time playfully bantering back and forth than attempting to come up with a concrete plan for a way out of his predicament.
If you and I fell in love, we'd have one hell of a story to tell. We'd be at a dinner party and someone would ask, "So how'd you two meet?" And I'd say, "You tell the story, dear." And you'd say, "No, you tell it better."
And I believe Lindsay's character represents the viewer.
I'll come back and then we can start the investigation.
She is actively playing detective, relying on her extensive knowledge of criminal activity from film and television, which is exactly what we do as an audience when watching a mystery. And thirdly, the dizzying set design. Well, I wouldn't call it dizzying so much as mesmerizing, much like the layout of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And it's not just the walls either. There is heavy patterns on the characters' clothing as well. Which begs the question, why would the director be trying to disorient the viewer so often? Well, it's because this film is jam-packed with visual and auditory clues.
So maybe it's a clue.
The biggest clue is the introduction of the Kansas City Shuffle.
Because of a Kansas City Shuffle.
When Goodcat brings up this concept, we as an audience are alerted to the fact that things probably aren't what they seem, and we need to pay extra attention to detail. And the most obvious details are the baseball and the watch. In just the second scene of the movie, Shlomo's bookie is killed by a baseball.
Benny Bagan, killed by a baseball.
My guess was a fastball.
The killer then approaches the dead bookie and picks up the book, and we see that he is wearing a watch. So the only things we know about this man is that he can throw a baseball well, and he wears a watch on his left wrist. Just 5.5 minutes of screen time later, we are introduced to the only other character in the film that we ever see throwing a baseball, young Henry. He also has a sudden outburst when his father nearly forgets to leave him his watch.
Wait, watch.
Almost forgot.
Fast forward 8 minutes, and Lindsay draws our attention to Slevin's watch.
But then there's the matter of your watch. Pretty fancy.
It's a fake.
Oh, but he didn't know that.
Maybe he didn't see it.
Of course he saw it. He asked you for the time.
Later on, when he's being interrogated by Dombrowski and Bukowski, he takes a colloquialism about cooperation quite literally.
You should really play ball, kid.
Really? You think I'm tall enough?
And as I said earlier, I feel that the significance of the watch is a direct reference to Pulp Fiction, another Bruce Willis film where a man attaches great sentimental value to his dead father's watch. Another blatantly obvious clue is the look of Slevin's backstory and Smith's hypothetical plan. Typically in movies, when a director wants to communicate to the audience that they're watching a flashback, they will change the color scheme or add some sort of glow. American History X, Kill Bill, and Memento use black and white to illustrate flashbacks, while films like Django Unchained use rich colors and an almost dreamlike glow. The thing is, whichever technique a director uses, there will be a stylistic continuity throughout the movie. In Slevin, the scenes depicting the events that took place in 1979 have a slight glimmer, and the reds and yellows have been bumped up to give a vintage 1970s look. The footage of present-day flashbacks are unaltered, except for when Lindsay is playing detective. They have a slight greenish hue and are shown at 6 frames per second. However, whenever Smith or Slevin is giving us false information, the footage is black and white. The other major clue is the foreshadowing of Slevin's situation by Smith very early on in the film.
Charlie Chaplin entered a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest in Monte Carlo and came in third.
The idea of mistaken identity is presented to us, and the notion that people can be blind to who someone is, even when the evidence is literally standing right in front of them. Slevin reinforces this concept with 3 lines fraught with double meaning.
That's when the villain is most effective, when you don't know what he looks like.
Well, then you have me mistaken for somebody else.
A lot of people have been thinking I'm somebody else these days.
So as far as that consensus is concerned, I think they missed the mark on this one. But critical commentary aside, there is plenty to like about this film, from an overlooked musical score to a brilliantly worked script that essentially allows the characters to tell the story to each other whilst the audience eavesdrops from their seats. But what I feel makes this movie so memorable is the use of the rule of 3. If you're not familiar with it, the rule of 3 is a writing principle that suggests that events or characters introduced in threes are more humorous, satisfying, or effective in execution of the story and engaging the audience. This is a technique I personally try to employ in nearly every speech, story, or video that I come up with. And this film uses the rule of 3 repeatedly in the dialogue.
Well, they say bad things happen in threes.
You said 3.
What?
You say this is your 3rd mugging? Well, according to Columbo, there are 3 things to look for at a crime scene. What's there now that wasn't there before? What was there before that isn't there now? And what's been moved?
The first time somebody calls you a horse, you punch him on the nose. The second time somebody calls you a horse, you call him a jerk. But the third time somebody calls you a horse, well, then perhaps it's time to go shopping for a saddle. There are 3 things that you may not do in order to save a life, including his own. He may not idol worship, commit adultery, or perform an act of premeditated murder.
You got 3 days.
Same time on 3.
1,
2.
3.
McGugan also uses it several times in the framing of shots, most notably when Slevin is being escorted and or assaulted by the boss and the rabbi's henchmen. The 3, pun intended, most notable 3 shots are as follows. When Good Cat is explaining the plan to the boss and Slevin is overlaid between them to contrast the conversations. When Slevin knocks out the rabbi and a quick flash is shown of Good Cat reflected in the vehicle window, revealing that he killed the rabbi's men. And when Slevin is addressing the boss and the rabbi from above, signifying his upcoming triumph over the two. All three of these shots demonstrate excellent economy of storytelling. So that's my analysis of Lucky Number Slevin. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.